Oops. Bring this up. Good morning and welcome to the March 22nd, 2021 Planning Commission meeting. Thank you for joining us in this remote meeting format we're using in response to Governor Brown's Stay Home, Save Lives order. This format enables the Planning Commission to meet, hear from the community, and take care of business while keeping its members, staff, and the public safe. Today, our meeting will begin with a public comment session followed by a work session on the River Road Santa Clara Neighborhood Plan. There are several housekeeping announcements and instructions related to the meeting format that I need to take care of first. Thank you for your patience while I work my way through them. Anyone wishing to access the meeting can do so by watching the live stream available on our website, the broadcast on Comcast Channel 21, or by following the access instructions listed on the agenda for this meeting. For those who join the meeting via computer, device, or phone, your microphone, webcam, and phone are automatically muted when you enter the meeting as an attendee. If you wish to participate during the public comment portion of the meeting and haven't already done so, please raise your virtual hand now to join the speaker's queue in one of two ways. For those viewing the meeting on a computer, laptop, or other device, click once on the hand icon. For those listening to the meeting on a phone, press *9. When public comment begins, our meeting moderator will announce the next two speakers at a time. When it is your turn, the moderator will announce your name and unmute your microphone. Public comment is limited to 10 minutes on our agenda today, so your time to speak will be based on the number of people signed up to speak. Finally, I want to thank everyone again for their patience, flexibility, and good humor as we work within this new virtual meeting format. As always, feel free to contact staff if there is testimony you were not able to provide or wish to get to us in a different manner. So with that, item A on our agenda is public comment, an opportunity for individuals to speak to the Planning Commission on any topic except for items scheduled for public hearing or public hearing items for which the record has already closed. As I mentioned, we have 10 minutes for this, and we'd like people to limit themselves to 3 minutes, although I don't know that anyone is signed up yet. Please raise your hand if you want to provide public comment. And when it's your turn, your microphone will be unmuted, and state your name clearly before beginning your comments. Staff will let you know when your time is up. When your time is concluded, the moderator will mute your microphone and move on to the next speaker. So with all of that, do we have anyone who wishes to speak this morning?
We don't have any hands up.
I don't see any hands up either. Okay, so I will close the public comment section and move on to item B on our agenda, which is River Road Santa Clara Neighborhood Plan. Chelsea is here to lead us through that. Thank you, Chelsea.
Thank you, Commissioner Ramey. Good morning or afternoon to all of you today. So I'm Chelsea Hartman. I'm a senior planner in the City of Eugene Planning Division, and I will also introduce a few folks. So Kate Purley and John Belcher are Community Advisory Committee co-chairs, and they'll be helping me with the presentation today. Some other Community Advisory Committee members that are here today is Mary Leontovich, Cameron Ewing. Let's see who else is here. Looks like that's in the main part. And then Harry Sanger and Jerry Finnegan are also in the attendees list as well. So good showing from our committee today. Hopefully folks can help participate in the discussion when there's questions. I'd also like to thank Elena Domingo and Terry Harding. They're also on the project team from the city side, and Jared Bowder from the Lane County staff is here as well to help with any county specific questions. So with that, I will jump into sharing my screen. Okay. And is everyone able to see my slides okay?
You don't have it on the slideshow, Chelsea. It's on.
There it is.
Okay. It's a little slow. Hopefully it won't be too bad. So the agenda for today is here. The goal of today's work session is to provide an update on the River Road Santa Clara Neighborhood Plan, which is transitioning from the action planning phase into the plan adoption phase. The project team is seeking input from the Eugene Planning Commission on land use code amendments that require city approval to include in the plan's adoption package. We have a staff recommendation and community advisory committee feedback to share, and we'll be seeking feedback and direction from the Planning Commission today. We're going to start with the project overview, touching on the different phases, outreach, and progress made over the past year. And then we will discuss the action planning phase, highlighting the plan adoption package and the phasing of land use code related actions. Finally, we will provide a brief overview of the River Road Corridor Study and open it up for discussion and next steps. And I'm going to pass it over to Kate Purley. And Kate, just let me know when you want me to move on to the next slide. I can drive for us.
Okay. I guess we'll just start with this slide showing us that this neighborhood planning process is a collaborative effort between the City of Eugene, Lane County, our two community organizations, and stakeholders in our neighborhood. We are served by a wide variety of special districts in our neighborhood as well, and they're part of the planning process, not in a decision-making capacity, but certainly in an involvement capacity. And all of our work has impacts on those districts, and we're cognizant of that all the way through. And just a reminder that this neighborhood plan process is going to guide changes in our neighborhood for probably the next 30 years. And so it's been a comprehensive look at everything we need to do. Ding! That's for you, Chelsea. And this slide shows us that we have a strong commitment to public involvement throughout the entire process. And this will help us manage community expectations and align them with the product that we come up with outside of the process. So in the center of the circle, we have our project management team, which consists of the staff and the two co-chairs of the Citizen Advisory Committee, and that's myself and John Belcher. So we meet every 2 weeks with Chelsea and Elena and Terry and occasionally Alyssa and other people as necessary. Outside of that circle, we have our Citizen Advisory Committee. That's made up of 11 members. It's 6 residents from Santa Clara, 5 from River Road, and 2 alternates, 1 from each neighborhood, that have been nominated by our neighborhood associations and have been appointed by you, our planning commission. Outside of that circle, we have our working groups. Our plan is divided into 5 topic areas, and the working groups are made up of citizens who are interested in those particular areas. So they're designed to be ad hoc and flexible. People can come and go as their time allows, but they can drill down as deeply as they want to in issues that they're passionate about in our neighborhood. And then outside of that, we have our general public. And we've been doing a pretty good job of making sure we take the time to break back out and share all of our information and work with the general public at critical junctures along the way. And we've had a number of those open house type forums at our North Eugene High School over the last 3+ years. But the COVID challenge is going to be interesting because we're getting ready to have another one of those opportunities, but we're not quite sure yet how that's going to play out. Ding! So our plan, neighborhood plan process was initiated in fall 2017. And our early phases, we asked our neighbors what they value now and what their hopes and visions were for the future. Our Citizen Advisory Committee and our working groups took this, all this information, and with that, we crafted goals and policies. And these goals and policies are really designed to reflect the neighbors' priorities and vision for the future. In 2019, the City Council and the Board of County Commissioners approved our draft goals and policies, and we use that as a platform for moving into our action planning phase. So we've been focusing on drafting, evaluating, prioritizing actions to implement all of our policies. It's taken longer than we expected, primarily due to the COVID-19 pandemic, which stopped us dead in our tracks a year ago. But we've also had a host of staff turnover, and the process has become more collaborative than I think either the city side or we had thought about. And so it takes us a little bit longer to work through all the different intricacies and idiosyncrasies that happen in our neighborhood. So at this stage, we're finally preparing to move on to the adoption phase. And adoption of the neighborhood plan will provide the city with policy direction to implement our actions into the future. Ding! So River Road Community Organization and the Santa Clara Community Organization have been partnering for years, long before our plan initiated in 2017. For the 15 years preceding that, we had joint outreach opportunities. We created our Santa Clara River Road Implementation Outreach and Planning Commission, and a learning report from that, where we went out and met with neighbors everywhere they were gathering in our neighborhoods. We hosted our own listening sessions. We were intent on making sure that we were in touch with what our neighbors' concerns were, what they saw as challenges, and what they saw as opportunities. That morphed into the Santa Clara River Road Implementation Planning Team, and then our joint strategy team. So for a good 15 years before we even started this neighborhood planning process, we've been laying the groundwork for making sure that the work we're doing today is relevant to the broadest possible spectrum of our neighbors. And the diagram that you see here was a diagram that was created specifically for the neighborhood plan. It's a schematic to show people how the process works from plan implementation, our plan instigation, all the way down through adoption on this sort of idea of a raft heading down a river. Let's see. I guess, yeah, our challenge right now that we're looking forward to is how to reach out and connect with our neighbors. So our two neighborhoods make up 32,000 residents, and it's a pretty big ask to be able to make sure that everybody's well informed and capable of making decisions based on accurate information. Ding! So our last update to you was in person on March 10th, 2020. And that was just over a year ago, and probably the last in-person work session that you had. Since the beginning of 2020, this is some of the work that we've done. We've had, we mailed postcards at the beginning of 2020 while we were still holding our neighborhood conversations, which were groups that we gathered we put it out to the neighborhood that we were going to have these conversations. They were about land use and anything neighborhood plan related. We hosted them at our local watering holes, restaurants, cafes. We had 20 residents per neighborhood conversation allotted space. We provided them with some refreshment and lots of information and took lots of feedback from them. And when we announced these, they filled up immediately. Then we added some more, and those filled up. And we just were winding down those small group meetings when the lockdown happened in March. And after that, we've gone out with a postcard mailing to specific property owners and residents of certain C2, R2, and large church properties that we have in our neighborhood. And we view those as opportunity sites for zone changes and possible use changes into the future. So we wanted to make sure we were making specific and pointed contact with people who might be greatly affected by changes in the allowable uses for their personal property. So we didn't get a lot of feedback from the people who got those mailings, and certainly silence isn't assent, and we're going to need to follow up with that. But since then, we've also continued our CAC meetings every month or 2 months. We've had a TBL sounding board. We've had regular contact with the county. We have our draft action plan, and we've completed the FTA corridor study. So although it was a lean year, there's still some meat on the bones there. Ding! So the plan itself is structured by topic areas. So we have 5 topic areas. We have land use, economic development, parks and natural resources, transportation, and community. And each of these topic areas has visions, which are aspirational descriptions for the best outcomes for our neighborhood. The visions are written as if you could see into the future. They describe how we want it to look, to feel, and to function 20 to 30 years out. Then we have our goals, which are our hopes for the future, and those are taken specifically from the vision. They're direct descendants of the vision itself. And then we have our policies, which are statements that are adopted to provide a consistent course of action to move us toward the goals. So those are part of the actual adopted plan and will be enforceable in that way. And then we have our action plan. And our action plan is enormous at this point, and it has all the strategies to implement our policies. And it's a standalone document that it's part of the plan, but you'll be able to use it in a standalone fashion. So given that our neighborhood is approximately 1/5 the land mass of the city of Eugene and 1/5 the resident population, it's not surprising that it's as large and as convoluted or complex as it is, because it's not just a land use document. It takes in all the important goals, hopes, and visions of our community in all aspects of the neighborhood for the next 30 years. Ding! Back to you, Chelsea.
Thanks, Kate. So like Kate was saying, the action plan is a pretty big document, and that's why your packet was almost 100 pages. Most of that is the action plan itself. So over the past year, we've really been focusing on the Community Advisory Committee and staff have been working together to flesh out the action plan a bit more. And this has involved prioritizing actions. And these are things that are particularly important and impactful to the community. So each of the topic areas have priorities. And I think it's important to note that there's over 250 actions in the action plan. So these are community identified actions that are possible strategies to implement the neighborhood plan policies. The action plan also includes general budget, timeframe, and feasibility estimates, and identifies different project types. So the 3 main project types are code amendments or zone changes, public programs or projects, or community partnerships. The community priorities are kind of across all these different project types within the topic areas. And today we will really just be focusing on the code amendments or zone changes piece. And that accounts for about 45 out of the over 250 actions, just to give you a little perspective. The project team is going to continue to add more detail to the action plan and topic area introductions. And those will include descriptions of related city or county projects and descriptions of actions that have moved forward with funding, such as transportation projects in the area. An important outcome of the action plan is plan implementation and collaboration. We want to continue collaboration between the community and city, county, and other partner agency staff to implement the plan. And to support implementation, the city is anticipating shifting toward a planning district approach to support coordination of a variety of programs, projects, and partnerships while working towards more equitable outcomes throughout the city. This approach is inspired by Eugene's Parks and Recreation System Plan, which uses neighborhood planning districts, and that is what is shown on this map here. They use this to conduct geographically based planning that allows for the consideration of unique characteristics and opportunities of the different areas. The map here also shows neighborhood association boundaries in the Envision Eugene key corridors. Like Kate mentioned, River Road and Santa Clara alone are 1/5 of Eugene, so it makes sense to plan for these 2 areas together. An important implementation tool will be an annual coordination and information sharing meeting between River Road and Santa Clara community representatives and city and county staff so that we can share work that's been completed, identify new community priorities, and plan for upcoming efforts. And I'll pass it back over to Kate.
So this is a slide about our action plan highlights. So like Chelsea said, our action plan is well over 250 actions divided into those 5 topic areas that we talked about. That's the different colored boxes there. And those are just underneath those boxes are highlights of things we've heard from our neighbors over and over again that it's really important to them for the future of their community. So some of those get lifted up to the idea of a status of a highlight. And some actions cut across all the topic areas. So collaboration and implementing outcomes and plan implementation and keeping track of the outcomes and whether we're reaching our targets and how we can better do that. Safety is another topic that's come all the way across all the topic areas. And so underneath there, you can see overarching themes. So there are themes that don't really have a specific action tied to them, or they have actions in all the different topic areas. So some of those themes were important for us to look at so that we're not just working in the silos of our topic areas, but we're looking at how the recommendations from each topic area are creating a synergy with the same sort of concerns in other topic areas. And these have been equity and inclusion, safety, connectivity, prosperity, the health of the human and our natural world, and our neighborhood identity. Let's see. Yeah, I think that says that pretty well. Ding!
Thank you, Kate. Okay, so as we shift from action planning, we're kind of shifting our focus to putting it all together into a neighborhood plan adoption package. It will be comprised of these components. So the neighborhood plan document is probably the biggest piece and will be a formally adopted, legally binding land use plan. And it will be supported by the action plan, which is the non-regulatory component that will guide implementation after the plan is adopted. Plan and code amendments will also be important to implement certain actions to support the community vision. And just a reminder, the goal of today's work session is to get input on the code amendments to include in the plan adoption package. Also in the plan adoption package, there will be the plan designations and zone changes to encourage active neighborhood centers and a variety of housing types. It's important to note that all of the proposed zone and code changes that we're currently thinking of are within Eugene's urban growth boundary, and any changes outside the city limits but within the urban growth boundary will only become effective as property owners choose to annex. And finally, we'll have to prepare the legal components for the formal adoption process. So as I said, depending on the extent and location of proposed code amendments or zone changes, these may require city approval, county approval, or both in some cases. City and county decision makers will both be asked to direct staff to prepare the plan adoption package. However, most of the land use code amendments will only apply within the city limits and require city adoption, while only a few specific code actions would also involve county adoption. Those differences are noted in the overview of adoption package and code actions in attachment B, with specific actions that would involve Blaine County implementation highlighted in blue. So the phasing of code actions. So since there are a lot of actions, we kind of took a look at what we thought we could get done with the neighborhood plan process, things that are related to other projects, and things that might need additional resources to implement. So staff recommended phasing implementation based on this. We took a look at both the community priorities, so things that are especially important to the community, and our capacity and resources. A summary of this is provided in the overview in attachment D, and the full detailed list of all code-related actions is in attachment E. And of course, the action plan contains all of the actions, not just the code-related ones. So the code actions generally fall into one or more of these categories. The first category are actions that staff recommend be implemented with the neighborhood plan adoption process. And that contains 30 out of the 45 actions. Group 2 includes actions that are related to other city or county projects that are either currently in progress or coming up soon. And that includes 7 of the code related actions. And then group 3 are the remaining actions that are code related that will be actualized as processes and resources allow. And that includes 8 actions. So because of this phasing, this means that many, but not all of the community priorities that require code amendments are feasible and being recommended by staff to be implemented with the plan adoption package. Actions that are not being considered with the neighborhood plan or not related to another plan or project that's the city or county will be working on will be implemented as processes and resources allow. Some of those actions would involve citywide code amendments and would require a broader public process, while a few actions have feasibility concerns identified by staff. Those are also noted in attachment D. We have also highlighted land use topic area priorities and priority code actions from other topic areas, such as economic development and transportation, that would need to be initiated and prioritized by decision makers to receive needed funding and staff resources to implement in attachment F. Okay, so getting into the different groups, group 1, and maybe I'll pause right after group 1 in case, so John can kind of jump in and fill in some gaps here. So group 1 are things that staff recommend with the plan adoption package. These try to highlight the key themes of the code actions that will primarily be implemented through the draft special area zone that was initially developed as part of the corridor study and will be continuing to refine moving forward in the neighborhood planning process. So a vibrant mixed use corridor will include code to implement the corridor mixed use and corridor residential land use concepts to support 20-minute neighborhoods. The special area zone will also include transition and compatibility standards between commercial and multifamily, specifically apartments, and lower density residential areas. And one of the feasibility concerns that staff identified was how to specifically regulate balconies. So as we move forward in developing the detailed code language, we'll be working to figure out the best ways to balance community desires for privacy with development feasibility. And that will be a collaborative process with the Community Advisory Committee, staff, and we hope to work more closely with our Planning Commission resources as well to help guide that. The Willamette Greenway overlay is another big component, and that intends to provide design transitions and protections for natural resources using clear and objective standards such as height limits, slope setbacks, and landscape buffering. Another important action is to allow for urban farmers to collectively sell produce on site. And related to that is increasing opportunities for urban animal keeping by adopting standards that currently apply within the city limits to the urban transition area code, which is adopted by Lane County and applies to the properties within Eugene's urban growth boundary, but outside of our city limits. And finally, in group 1 will be all of the plan designation and zone changes to support the special area zone. So those are areas that have been considered from the River Road Corridor study, as well as the C2, R2, and large church properties that Kate was mentioning earlier that are outside of that corridor study area. Staff is also conducting research to identify potential plan designation and zone conflicts, and will be developing recommendations to resolve those where possible. And any recommended changes will be included in early outreach to property owners as part of the adoption phase. So John, if you want to jump in and fill in any gaps, or I don't know if there's questions at this point since I can't see folks.
Well, thank you, Chelsea. Let me say a couple of things. Excellent presentation by both presenters thus far. Doesn't leave a whole lot to be said, but I guess the point I would make is, although we have received the transit overlay district, well, the corridor study, excuse me, from the contractor, we being the city and the CAC realize that there's some real challenges in the information they gave us. And a lot of that is how we deal with the transition issues and the zones themselves, et cetera. So to some degree, this is a work in progress, and we can't tell you all the answers because we have to open up that package with the city, the staff, and another consultant to try to work through those concerns that we have. The other thing I would just speak to for a minute is the Willamette Greenway issue. This is a rather complex one. The neighborhood has three basic concerns. The first concern is we would like to maintain the character and size of the housing and the uses that are along the corridor now. This Willamette Greenway overlay has a high potential. Well, it will do that. We know it will. But there are two other issues that are a bit more challenging. One is the fact that I think it's rightly recognized that the Willamette Greenway ordinance is not clear and objective as written. It has an awful lot of to the maximum extent practicables in them, which clearly is not a criterion that is clear and objective. So it needs revision. And we are very concerned that without that, the Greenway ordinance doesn't give us much protection because it can easily be appealed based on that issue. So as Chelsea points out, it clearly is a citywide issue. And there needs to be a process to deal with it, and we need to find what that is, but it's still an issue, and that's our concern. The third issue is one that came up in a recent appeal of the process for putting lighting on the Willamette Greenway's West Bank Park bike path. And at that point in time, several neighbors raised a concern about the fact that the current regulations do not provide, in their opinion, any protection for wildlife. It only deals with the issues of water quality. Now, the challenge there is that our ordinance was written under the guidance of the state Willamette Greenway provisions. So making changes to deal with what we think is a significant issue is not only going to involve citywide issues, it may involve going up to the legislature and making changes too. But again, it's an issue we have concern with. So in a nutshell, that's probably the toughest nut of our discussions, but it does illustrate the concerns that we have about getting to a resolution. I'll stop there. Thank you.
And I don't know if we want to open it up for questions at this point, or I can kind of get through the last few slides and then we can just talk about all the different pieces and go back to slides as needed.
I think Chelsea will just go ahead. Let's
Okay.
just go ahead and let you finish up and then we'll circle back. I like where we're going. Thank you.
Sounds good. Thank you. And thank you, John. That was super helpful context and kind of leads into the next few slides. So group 2, if I can change it. So group 2 actions are things that are related to other projects that the city or county are working on. Some of those include middle housing code changes, the city's complete streets design guidelines, and Lane County's upcoming illicit discharge code changes, among others. These actions will involve collaboration with staff as part of those projects. And one of the feasibility concerns that we've identified here, one of the actions that has been important from the beginning in the neighborhood plan is transitions between R1 properties. And we now know that will be pretty difficult due to the new state law. But we do know that Eugene's Middle Housing Project will be considering an approach for R1 standards citywide. So we'll be collaborating closely to explore what's possible there. Any comments on that one, John? Anything to add for group 2?
No, I think you did well. Thank you.
Okay. And then group 3. So there's a lot on this one, or a lot of words to say. Group 3 are the remaining actions that aren't being recommended by staff for the neighborhood plan adoption package, or they're not related to another city or county project. Some of these are in group 3 because staff felt they should be citywide code amendments with a broader public process. And many of them would need to be initiated and prioritized by decision makers to receive funding and resources. The first one that was a priority for the community is improvements to the water resources conservation and water quality overlays. Part of the action focuses on improving the water resources overlay to better protect wildlife and riparian areas. So kind of related to the West Bank path lighting that John was mentioning earlier. And part of another priority action would involve county adoption of the water quality overlay, which was not adopted outside of the city limits, but applies upon annexation. Another important community priority is to improve the neighborhood applicant meeting process. This is one where staff agrees the process needs to be looked at. However, this should be a citywide code amendment with a broader process. Implement opportunity citing is another thing that's been important from the beginning. Currently, opportunity citing is not adopted in code, and incentives would require new funding to implement. We have discussed focusing more on collaboration between the city, community, and developers to get at the intent of this idea. And the CAC has also talked about recommending highlighting this at the Santa Clara station site. So the remainder of the site that's next to the new Santa Clara transit station. The CAC also wants to recommend funding opportunity citing co-development to the Eugene City Council. Because adopting opportunity citing is a part of the group 3, it would need new resources to implement and would need to be initiated by council. We also just recently discussed the desire of opportunity citing is really to make commercial or mixed use development more feasible and less about focusing just solely on housing. The Willamette Greenway permit code changes. So this is one that's partially implemented with the special area zone with the Willamette Greenway overlay. And this action talks about the broader desires for clear and objective standards and better protections for natural resources citywide through the Willamette Greenway permit process. And as John was mentioning earlier, one of the potential solutions here is lobbying the state to refine the statewide planning goals so that it can provide clearer direction for our local criteria. 2 additional code actions that are in group 3 that were not identified as high priority, but they're still actions in the action plan are removing barriers to tiny homes. This is something that's related to housing tools and strategies and is in the action inventory, and landscaping, maintenance, and right-of-way. So this action's mostly about allowing fruit trees in the right-of-way for food production. However, this has previously been discouraged due to concerns around pests and maintenance. And then finally, the last 2 that are in group 3, these are in group 3 more so because staff has feasibility concerns. The first one has been a community priority from the beginning as well and is about prohibiting private streets. Staff just noted concerns about impacts or potential negative impacts to the buildable lands inventory since some developments are only possible with private streets. But we did talk about recently in a discussion that this action is more about maintenance of private streets. And a multi-pronged approach would be needed to really get at this issue, both code considerations to limit future problems and new funding and programs to deal with existing private street maintenance. And then finally, the last one is to increase minimum parking standards. This is another big community priority. And staff identified this as being concerning because it's just not consistent with Eugene's transportation system plan and climate action plan and current House Bill 2001 state law. We also flagged that it's related to the state's rulemaking for climate friendly and equitable communities, which will specifically address limiting off-street parking requirements. But we have discussed possible solutions to get at the intent of this issue. We will be talking about parking as part of the special area zone, of course, with the corridor mixed use and corridor residential zones. And we also, there's a lot of actions in the action plan that talk about just overall transportation improvements to alleviate the need for parking and reliance for parking. And then finally, We've also been discussing to continue the efforts that are going on with the city's parking program to establish parking enforcement around Echo apartments. Lessons learned from this could help us inform future policies for how we deal with new commercial or more multifamily developments that are adjacent to substandard streets that don't really accommodate on-street parking. And recently we also discussed another piece of the parking issue comes from when apartments charge fees for parking spaces, which could be a deterrent for residents to pay for those spaces and may lead to more on-street parking. Okay, any thoughts on group 3, John? I know it's a lot.
I think it'd be better to deal with it during the question phase. I'm sure they'll come up.
Okay, perfect.
Thanks.
Just a few more slides and then we can open it up. Ooh. Okay, so the River Road Corridor Study, as we mentioned earlier, just a reminder for folks who are listening, the River Road Corridor Study is a subset of the neighborhood plan. It really focuses on land use along the River Road Corridor from Northwest Expressway up to the newly opened Santa Clara Transit Station. The corridor study included an analysis and developed land use code concepts and multimodal recommendations to support the neighborhood plan vision. The corridor study work also experienced delays due to various reasons, many of the same ones that we've been experiencing, in addition to awaiting the outcome of House Bill 2001. In December 2020, so just a few months ago, the project team wrapped up our work with the consultants and submitted deliverables to the Federal Transit Administration. And this really was just a project summary of the work that had been done and the draft recommendations for land use and transportation improvements in the corridor. And that is provided as a link in your materials. There's still a lot of work left to do, as John mentioned. We still need to explore the feasibility of the code concepts and making sure that the code is fully aligning and supporting the neighborhood plan vision, and is also in compliance with citywide policies and House Bill 2001. The project team will continue to work on refining the land use concepts as we develop our detailed code language in the next phase of work. And we'll work to incorporate any relevant pieces from the corridor study into the neighborhood plan. Okay, so finally, the action for today is asking or seeking input from the Planning Commission on which land use code amendments that require city approval to include in the plan adoption package. I think always, we're always accepting general feedback and direction at every phase of the project, and it's always helpful as we move forward into the next phase of work. So this provides an overview of the adoption phase timelines, starting with preparing the plan adoption package and then vetting it with the community. So we'll be ramping up outreach again soon. A recommendation from the Community Advisory Committee, River Road and Santa Clara community organizations and staff will be what gets forwarded on to both the Eugene and Lane County Planning Commissions for the formal adoption process. So the next steps will be going to the Lane County Planning Commission to get their input on the code amendments that require county approval on April 6th. And then in May, we'll be going to Eugene City Council and Lane County Board of Commissioners to get their input and direction to prepare the plan adoption package and move into the adoption phase. And I think that's finally the last slide. So I'll stop sharing and just, open it up for questions and discussion.
Well, Chelsea and John and others, thank you. Thank you for that wonderful presentation. I think everyone should be congratulated at this point. You know, you've been at it, as you said, for, was it a decade? I mean, it seemed like a long time. And the work really is rich and deep and thorough. And in some ways, that's what's daunting about it. There's so much of it. But I think where we are at this moment is trying to sort through what you've done and help you out by reviewing priorities that you've set within your own groups. And you know, without being able to take the the decade to pile through it all myself. I'm going to rely on you, and certainly everything I've heard today seems very reasonable and appropriate. So with that sort of introduction, which was sort of broadly, congratulations on what you've done and thank you for your work. Commissioner Edwards, you have your hand up, so take it away.
Thank you, Chair Ramey. To tack on a little bit to what Chair Ramey just explained, there has been a tremendous amount of work that has gone into this process, and I just want to acknowledge that because you all have come before this body multiple times, and there's been so much work that's so commendable, and you guys have done such an excellent job at really bringing the community together and really getting into the nuts and bolts of this plan. So I definitely would encourage you to engage your legislators. I know that there are a number of pieces of legislation that, as I look at some of the pieces in this proposal, that actually would stand to have some negative impacts. And so I think it's really important that legislators know all the work that you're doing. There's a bill that relating to the statewide planning goals and changing those. There's a bill that is scheduled for a vote on Thursday that it deals with transit-oriented residential densities. So definitely think that this is really important work, and it needs to get in front of those policymakers before they, start doing things that really kind of undo all of the work that you all have been doing. I had a couple of things to just mention and point out, having to do with some components that are dealing with I'll just jump into them. So the neighborhood applicant process and the neighborhood meetings, that's a piece. Transition standards, and then obviously the Willamette Greenway are all pieces that really stand to have impacts on other planning processes. So while they have risen to the surface on this plan, I think that they justify some attention in order to kind of deal with them. And so I'm not sure what that looks like, and I don't know, if staff has thoughts about that, but I know that some of those are definitely revisions that need to go through the process and go through Planning Commission and City Council adoption. But I do think that it's worthy of getting those resolved before we then jump into the next neighborhood planning process and beyond that. And then the other thing I would just point out, it's just something that I noticed. Obviously, my day job, I work for LTD, and we're really engaged with the city on the Moving Ahead project. And so as I looked at a lot of the transportation actions and safety improvements and things like that, those are really going to be woven into the Moving Ahead project. And so I'm not really sure how those will interact and how decisions here will interact with the decisions that plan is tackling. But I think it's really important to kind of keep those conversations succinct so that the right hand and the left hand both know what each other is doing. And because a lot of those improvements that are being proposed here are really kind of part of that project that we're hoping that council will re-engage the community on. So those were just a couple of comments, and I'll let others jump in, but thank you very much. This is excellent work. So I commend you all.
Thank you. Commissioner Beeson.
Thanks. I've got a couple of things, and if I may need to go to a second round, I want to, in terms of approaching this, as has been, well, let me start out. I really want to appreciate the people who've been working on this, and I certainly can't list all the names, but I've been to a couple of meetings on this since I've been on the Planning Commission, and so there's John and Kate, and there's Chelsea and Elena, there's Terry. I know there is a wide number of people, and it's reflected in this in terms of how you've approached it. And I think it's a tremendous amount of work. I actually appreciate the way that it's organized. I can see that it's got a ways to go, but I think it's got the foundation there to kind of come together as an organized plan. I guess I want to might approach this a little differently. I spent quite a bit of time going through the material, and I was working to try to figure out how to give some guidance and feedback on code amendments for you to take forward to the council, which was difficult when you have 250 actions or whatever it was. So I found myself, I guess what I'd like to do is just walk through a couple of things and maybe confirm the timeline that was in the written material, and you also had on the slide. I think it's the attachment C. It is attachment C. I think it's pretty clear, but I want to confirm a couple of things. When I look at this timeline, this is the adoption phase, and there's really two parts. There's preparation of the package, and then there's the formal review and approval of the package. And you've got the seasonal schedule here, which I've taken the liberty to write some dates on. And I think I'd just like to kind of confirm your target at this point is for adoption by the City Council out in mid 2022. So what it appears to me, that would be, if everything goes the way it is on here, June of 2022, which for some reason or another aligns with HB 2001 implementation. The first part of it through 2021, I think the way I'm seeing this, and I'm kind of, you were looking for input. I found, I guess I want to say, I am supportive of the group one recommendation, the phasing and so on that's coming from the staff and coming from the committee at this point. Supportive of that. My understanding is that what you'll be doing over the next several months is taking that and beginning to translate all that into a plan, into a formal plan that you'd have by the end of the year, I guess, to put into the formal process. And when I go into the actions, and there's a variety of them, and I go into the notes, I see things where you have particular actions you're recommending, and there'll be a note that some of the stuff can be accomplished initially with code amendments, other requires additional work. So I think I'm kind of trusting and or assuming that as you put the plan together in the remainder of this year, you're going to also be putting together the proposed code amendments out of group one that you'd be looking to take to the council for initial adoption. And I'm kind of also assuming and wanting to request that the Planning Commission be able to see this whole thing again as the package comes together towards the end of the year. And I recognize we have a couple of commissioners who are working on this, and that's good. But I think at some point it's going to be kind of done and ready to go into this more formal public hearing process in 2022. So I'm kind of assuming there's a chance for us to look at it again. I'm assuming you're going to go out and get additional input from the community. You're going to incorporate, as you figure it all out, everything that comes out of the corridor study. So I guess I'm also assuming you're, we've got the actions that are in your initial or in this group one. Over the next several months, if there's any discussion, if there's any additional actions that might emerge from all the other actions, some of that may come in. I don't know. I guess I'm just saying you're going to come up with a final plan recommendation, and I'm kind of looking forward to that. I think that's kind of what I guess wanted to just sort of clarify, maybe with the group and with Chelsea, that I kind of got that right as to how you're thinking of this schedule and how you're going to go through it.
Yes, definitely. I think you said it all very well. There's still a lot of work left to do, mostly to develop the code amendment language. And we do plan on doing that between the Community Advisory Committee, the project staff, and pulling in Commissioner Isaacson and Commissioner Taylor, who are our Planning Commission resources, to help us guide that process. And I'm sure we'll have definitely work sessions with the full Planning Commission as we have more draft detailed language ahead of that formal adoption process to make sure we're on the right track. And of course, we'll be doing lots of community outreach on all of those pieces as well. So yep, that all sounded exactly right.
So I'll pass here. I got one other question to kind of follow up on that. When I look at what you have for the code, for the plan implementation package and all of the various parts of it. That all makes sense to me. One of the things I saw in a couple of places was that you carry into that adoption the special area zone. I think I want to confirm, when I go and look at some of the diagrams, there was one that was pretty recent in your, the attachment G that you sent out. Anyway, there's this long map of River Road, which I'm sure everybody's familiar with. And there's the various proposed new zoning areas. And there's kind of a diagram of that. I guess I don't need a real detailed answer here, but I'm assuming that the formal special areas zone, that is what's described with those 4 or 5 proposed land use zones that make up that long kind of strip from Northwest Expressway out through Hunsaker. And that's what would, I guess, be in the final plan and would be adopted by the council and would end up as a special area zone in the city of Eugene plans.
Right. Yep, that's correct. And so there's the corridor study area, and then there's also some additional, so anything that's C2 in River Road and Santa Clara. So there's some C2 in Santa Clara beyond the corridor study area that we also wanted to consider for changes so that we can kind of take advantage of that opportunity that we have now. So some C2 properties, some of the R2 properties as well. And there's some pretty big, large church properties in both neighborhoods that folks felt were a good potential redevelopment opportunity that we wanted to also include in the special area zone. So that's still figuring out parcels and all of that, but yeah.
Okay. Well, I'll stop there. I may have a couple of other questions as we go if there's time, but I just echo what's been said. I appreciate what's been done here by the community and the staff, and I'm looking forward to seeing the next iterations. Thanks.
So I see John Belcher has his actual hand up. So
thank you. For some reason, I can't find the chat to raise my virtual hand. So if I may respond to Commissioner Beeson on the first question, and that is, we've had some discussions about how to move this process forward and how to involve the Planning Commission, and certainly we're very appreciative of our resources. I just want to suggest something that we used way back, maybe the previous century when I was on the Planning Commission, and it was on how we dealt with the original discussion on accessory dwelling units. And what the commission did at that point is you formed a subcommittee that consisted of less than a voting majority of the commission and resource people, in that case, builders who had been building accessory dwelling units at the time, and then neighborhood representatives. And that group processed the proposal that eventually came to the commission. And it seems like that is a model that could work very well with this group, whether it's just our 2 resource people and us, or maybe an additional planning commissioner as well. But the idea of having a subcommittee that churns through this and works collaboratively, so when it comes to the commission for feedback and hopefully incrementally as we work through it, that committee would be a conduit to make that happen. So I'm just throwing that out there as a possibility.
I want to say I appreciate the way it's organized right now, and the 2 Commissioner Isaacson and Commissioner Taylor, who are part of that support group or steering committee or whatever we're calling that. I like the way that's all set up, and I'm just, I think, wanting to ascertain that as we get out towards the end of the year, we'd be able to, kind of see the final plan. Because there is a lot, and it's good to have some smaller groups really engaging the detail. It also reminds me very quickly, I spent some time looking at what I'm thinking the schedule is for HB 2001, and I'm seeing as your schedule on the attachment C, and it appears to me that we'll be done with our code amendments on HB 2001 kind of in their substantial form around the middle of this year. I'm kind of assuming we'll have a bunch of that work done so that as you finalize the plan, you're going to be able to be sure that you're not doing anything inconsistent with what's coming out of that whole other piece of work to be sure the city complies with HB 2001. And so I would just mention that. I think I'm kind of watching those two as they sort of intersect or merge.
So I see Commissioner Borowski, your hand's up, but Terry, did you want to jump in and just confirm the coordination of HB?
Absolutely, yes. The two projects need to be coordinated without getting too far down the road of HB 2001. It has had a fairly significant impact on the Riverhead plan, which was started way before we knew what shape the House Bill administrative rules would take. So there is, at this point in time, significant coordination to be done to make sure that they align and support one another.
Okay, significant need, and it also looks like adequate time to do that. Commissioner Borowski.
Thank you, and thank you to everybody for all your hard work over the time. I guess what I'd like to say is that, you know, now it comes down to my position as a planning commissioner. I have to take this neighborhood plan that's been worked on and developed for years and bring it into the context of the city as a whole, because that's my job, is looking at this as a city as a whole, because we're not put in by districts or anything like that. And with that in mind, I have to see, are there things that this plan may do that will affect other areas of the city? And is it consistent with goals that the city as a whole is looking to achieve? And is it helping achieve those goals? Or in some cases, maybe it is not allowing those goals to move forward. You know, it would be very easy to have a neighborhood plan that says, I just want R1 single family housing in my neighborhood. You know, that may be what everybody's, you know, you bring somebody together and say, I just want nice big houses with big lawns in my neighborhood. And that's our neighborhood plan. Well, that wouldn't fit with the city of Eugene's goals as a whole. And so I have to look as a planning commissioner, what's going to be codified and see how it goes to those citywide goals. And John Belcher, when you and I were sitting on the commission together, one of the main goals that we were struggling with was transitions between different levels of use. Since that time, the community goals have shifted, I think, and it's leading more towards our housing problems and crises. And so when I'm looking in some of these things that are in your plans, when it goes to transition standards, you know, you want transition standards between R1 and higher density residential. Well, we've been hearing in the last few years, you know, residential is residential. Just because you're a renter and live in an apartment doesn't mean that your place of being is any greater or less deserving of protection. So that has to be looked at carefully, I think. Another thing that I'm seeing is, you know, yes, we want mixed use. So we want mixed use with commercial on the ground floor and residential up above. But is that economically feasible? Or will it not get built because it's more economically feasible to do residential only in mixed use? These are some of the questions that I want to have flushed out a little bit. You know, there's other things in here that I see where we're almost picking winners and losers, right? When it comes to some of the economic development areas, we only want local businesses. We don't want other businesses. I don't know how that's going to be achieved. when it comes to drive-throughs, if you are a coffee kiosk, we like you. But if you're a burger chain, we don't like you. So again, picking winners and losers, and I don't know how we're going to get to that. As far as moving forward and getting direction to Chelsea and the rest of the staff, it was really difficult for me to go through and say, yes, I want this one put into code, and no, I don't want this one put into code in the fire hose that I'm drinking out of right now. So I think it needs to be, I don't know how, but I think it needs to be whittled down a little bit. So those are just some of my thoughts right now.
Well, thank you, Commissioner Borowski. Oh, John, do you want to jump in right now, and then I'll say what I was my round?
Yeah, thank you again. Commissioner Borowski, you're absolutely right. Those are tough issues. The transition standards is one that, if I may be so bold, was a major reason why the Willamette, South Willamette corridor study failed. We believe we are trying to recommend appropriate transition standards that can resolve that conflict. But the devil is in the details, and we'll see how we work that out. We asked our neighbors what they wanted to see in developing our action items, and those are the ones that are before you. They may or may not be feasible, we understand that, but we felt we needed to be responsible to our neighbors and bring them forward. So yes, we have some tough discussions ahead. Thank you.
Well, welcome to the Planning Commission once again, former commissioner. It's all tough. As once was explained to me, community building is messy, so let's not pretend that it's not going to be hard work. I just want to follow up a little bit on Commissioner Borowski's point about coordination, and I know this is something we talked about earlier. Actually, I did spend some time today down the rabbit hole of the web-based map, looking at all the cool things that you can do on that. But one of the things I noticed is that it doesn't show, at least I couldn't find the layer that showed where the transit facilities were. And I know that is still a moving target a little bit, that those may not have been set yet or may be moving. But that, if I think back to planning 20 years ago, trying to coordinate transit and development was a huge, big deal. And so when I look at the city of Eugene, I know that's one of our big deals too. And in fact, the whole idea of doing corridor planning comes from that. And so to start looking at the map and not be able to see where the transit stops were or how that align, I think if there's some way to add that layer, that would be great as we're going forward, because then we can begin to see how these things tie together. The other thing would be parks and open spaces. If we can clearly denote where those are on the map, I think one of those is sort of, classic 21st century planning, or maybe 20th and 21st, but overlapping land use and transportation. And then secondarily, livability, walkability, some of that's about parks and where those are. So if you can add those to that interactive map, I think that would help me understand it. And then lastly, I wanted to circle back, and Commissioner Borowski didn't bring it up this time, so I get to, but this idea of monitoring. Monitoring is in your written material, and I saw it show up at the bottom of one of the slides as well. And frankly, I think that we can't begin to prioritize which of these we're going to push off until later without also being honest about monitoring how we do later. Because I think it would really waste a lot of this effort if we didn't get the plan together and not revisit it on a regular cycle and say, oh, you know what? Those level 3 things we didn't address, wow, we should have, or maybe that's fine the way they are. So some sort of being really explicit about this idea that the plan lives. We recognize the work that's done today, but we also recognize the need to revisit how effective it is down the line and commit to being open about that, sort of being transparent about that and saying, yes, it worked, no, it didn't work. Well, what should we do now? And I think that's kind of the wave of the future, and I hope in these area neighborhood plans is that they become more living documents because they have this cycle built into them that allows us to circle back and understand what worked and what didn't, and then we recognize, okay, well, if it didn't work, then let's see if we can fix it. So I have a whole bunch of hands up here. I just talked too long, didn't I? I know that Commissioner Isaacson is next in line, and then I have Kate. I see your hands up, and then we'll circle back to Commissioner Borowski.
Thank you, Chair Ramey. This is a question for staff. I was curious, given the level of detail that this plan is, and all kind of acceptance that it makes everyone's job easier, and that the thoroughness that they put into it, do we have any idea how the other neighborhoods are coming along? And would it be a good idea, rather than waiting until they're kind of further down the line, to share this with them and kind of give them a stepping stone to be able to create their own plan in kind of a similar fashion?
I'm not sure I fully understand your question. Are you asking if we can share the model with future neighborhood plan planning efforts?
I visit like Harlow Neighbors and Bethel and Good Pasture, and they're kind of all over the place in terms of their organizations. So I know they're going to be working on their own plan to a degree. Is it possible that do we have an idea how far along they are in the process? I mean, River Road's 10 years into theirs, right? So are they 3 years into their plan? Are they also 10 years and they have a similar plan as us? Because it would be nice if it was all kind of a similar format to be able to see the complexity of it.
I see. That's a great question and a really big question. I do know that the next two in line on the city's work plan are the university area neighborhoods and the Bethel neighborhood for kind of city supported neighborhood planning efforts. I haven't heard what's going on in Harlow. I'd love to learn more. But I don't think there's anything stopping particularly staff on the project management team and the community advisory committee from sharing what they've been doing with other neighborhoods. I know that River Road and Santa Clara benefited from coordination and collaboration with other neighborhoods that had gone through previous planning efforts. So I think those are all good suggestions, and don't know if John or Kate or any of the other CAC members have follow-up questions for Commissioner Isaacson about that.
John, why don't you jump in here?
Sorry, once again, I can share that we did have a discussion with the Active Bethel citizens several months back about how our process is working and how they could potentially benefit from it. I think one of the products that we hope to produce is a lessons learned document, which hopefully would serve as a guide as we work through this, because certainly we have lessons learned, such as it'd be nice if we had the same planner through the whole process. On the other hand, if we didn't take so long, that might not be such an issue. So yes, I think we are planning to help benefit future neighborhoods from our efforts.
Yeah, not to bleed our dead horse, but the more, John, your team works with, the more the staff works with, the more the planning commission works with, the less reinventing the wheel that every one of these neighborhood associations is going to have to do. The quicker we can get 10 years down to maybe 5 years, or 5 years down to 2 years, God forbid, we can actually get through this a lot quicker. So that's the document is more reflective of what people are seeing on the ground, because I know one of the complaints some folks are going to have is this plan is 10 years old. How much of that reflects what we're seeing on the ground now as opposed to what it was 10 years ago? So the more we can cut into that, I think the better and more responsive the plan will be.
All right, Kate, you wanted to weigh in here. Thank you.
Yeah. So I just wanted to, Commissioner Isaacson, every neighborhood has different complexities, and certainly the funny nature of our two neighborhoods, with a vast majority of residents being county unincorporated residents and being served by a multitude of special districts, and being such a physically enormous neighborhood and having a third of the landmass of Santa Clara's neighborhood outside the UGB, but still within our neighborhood boundaries, makes it 10 times more complex, that and its actual physical size, versus like the university neighborhood, which has a more discrete set of issues and a much smaller physical area to manage, will make things different for sure. And then Commissioner Ramey, I wanted to respond to your talking about the monitoring, ongoing monitoring, and that's been an issue for us from the very get-go, knowing that we didn't want a static plan that sat on the shelf that didn't serve us 5 years from now. And it's been our collaboration with the city and the county has been really fruitful and interesting in that I think the city is moving to a new dynamic with neighborhood planning, and knowing that every neighborhood plan needs to be a living document and require ongoing implementation and monitoring. And the neighborhood has to also step up to the plate there and be able to advocate for ongoing implementation. And the way that we can do that most effectively, we've decided so far at this point, is number one, to divide the city out into these planning districts, like Chelsea was showing from the parks planning perspective. So it's not just for a neighborhood, it's for an entire district. And then to have these annual meetings with the staff leads from the different departments from both the city and the county and the representatives from the community organizations, so we can bring what's the hot topic that really needs serious attention this year, and the staff can bring information about what's in the pipeline, what might be coming, what's available from the state, or what kind of grant funding is out there that they're not sure they have a project that lines up with. But being able to collaborate on those things so we create the best amount of synergy to make the maximal amount of these actions happen in a timely way. But that requires a kind of ongoing communication and collaboration that, to wit, hasn't happened in history. And so we're making uncharted territory here. We're charting new ground, trying to figure out A, how to create these plans, B, how to create this one that responds to the specifics of our neighborhood, but creates enough of a model that other neighborhoods can use, and to create a future dynamic that makes planning for every neighborhood that much more effective and creates a kind of capacity and collaboration within the neighborhood itself that has a sustained effort. So instead of neighborhoods having an issue du jour that brings people out of the woodwork and that recedes and people go back to sleep in their world of contentment until the next crisis comes. Instead, how do we make people engaged in a way that they're constantly looking to figure out ways to improve their neighborhood and meet the goals of its citizens on into the future? So that's what we're trying to do.
Well, that really, I mean, that touches on a whole bunch of really, that sounds great. I would only recommend that the more explicit the plan can be about that, the better. So there's a framework established, there's a goal established, there's membership established for that group, that the city be willing to commit resources to staff it, to be sure it happens. So those kinds of things, if they're included in the plan, then I think monitoring has a better chance of happening. Otherwise, it's those of us who are here at the moment saying we should do this. Whereas if there's a framework put in place that says this group will meet and they'll review these principles and policies on this schedule and report back and do all the things you were talking about, identify things that work well, things that aren't working well, and possible resources to solve the problems that aren't working well. I think that creates a living document, but it has to be embedded in today's language in order for it to happen. And I think that's the part of it that we need to see and be sure it works right. So I've got Commissioner Borowski, followed by Commissioner Beeson.
Thank you. And I'm going to kind of speak a little bit to that. What was just talked about the monitoring, but so for Kate and John and all the people on the CAC and those things, I think it's real important to look at the action items that haven't risen to the level of codification, because I'm going to play the skeptic here, okay? I heard a lot of times, we'll get to those when there's process and resources allow, okay? I've been around this long enough to know that process and resources are tough to come by. And if it's not raised, if you've got significant action items that you think need to be put into this plan, bring it to us and bring it to the council, because my feeling is once this is adopted, once that book is shut, reopening it as much as we say we want to monitor and do all of that, it will be a while. And so if there are certain action items that are true and to your hearts as an organization, and they're not raised to a level that you think they should be, let us know that, and we'll see if we can make that happen. The other thing that I want to bring up to staff is something that John helped me remember was when we're talking about plan designations and zone changes and how that relates to individual properties. That was something that we ran into at South Willamette, and it didn't happen until we were in the 95th hour of a 100-hour game there. And people found out that, well, my plan designation is different than what the zone change is, and the property next door to me can upzone to 5 stories, but I'm in a residential neighborhood. It's really important that that information gets out there, and ones that are designated a certain way in the metro plan could be upzoned. I want to make sure that that gets out to the people on the ground. You know, you were talking about some of these bigger properties, the C2 properties and the large church properties and stuff. Those people don't need to know that there may be a plan designation change, but also the adjacent neighbors to those people need to know that this may affect what's going to be put next to you, and because that can torpedo really good planning processes. Thank you.
Commissioner Beeson.
Yeah, I wanted to respond to Commissioner Isaacson and also Kate, a couple of others. We were talking about various plans going on around the community and consistency or not and uniqueness. And I am no expert on, as you know, I am no expert on any of this. I had some similar questions. One of the things I did was I went back and I looked at, I picked 4 or 5 plans, Jefferson, Whitaker, West University, and Willa Kinsey. I didn't read them all, but I kind of started plowing through them. One of the things I noticed in the way that you guys are setting this thing up, you have what you're calling topic areas, the economic development and land use and transportation and so on. And on all of those other plans, they happen to call them elements, but they have these major areas, transportation, land use, community, and so on, little different names here and there. The other thing they do, which you mentioned, I think most of them, for each of the topic areas or the elements, they do go in and define or describe their vision. They describe their goals. They have their policies, and most of them have then the supporting actions. So it sort of felt to me, after I spent maybe an hour or so looking through all this stuff, that there really kind of was some consistency. And I don't want to go too far with that, because I think it also recognized that there's some, as has been mentioned, quite a bit of uniqueness amongst the areas of Eugene, but there were some kind of similarities there. And so I don't know, I guess it gave me a little bit of comfort. To the question of monitoring, I found as I went through them, that question does sort of emerge, and I don't know that there's any indication about how any of those are monitored. It appears, for what it's worth, Eugene did quite a bit of work in neighborhood plans back in the late 80s and 90s, as some of you probably know. And a bunch of these ones I mentioned kind of all came about right in a kind of a, I don't want to say a flurry, but there was a period of time where there were quite a few. So anyway, I would just offer that. I guess, and I just to reiterate what I said earlier, I'm very interested, several months down the road or whenever it happens, I'm interested in seeing the actual plan, what kind of emerges out of all of this, when you draft that plan that's going to go forward and what it's all going to look like. Thanks.
Okay, commissioners. Yes, Kate, would you like to?
Yeah, I have a quick question, Commissioner Borowski. So a lot of there are a large number of actions that don't require a code amendment or a zone change, but are really reliant on community interest and partnerships, perhaps with nonprofits or watershed councils, or you know, and we recognize that there are the limitation to the effectiveness of our plan might very well be the number and fervency of committed residents to carry it out, because so many of our actions really rely on a group of committed residents to manifest the actual physical change on the ground, whether it could benefit from financial support or material support or not. But I know, so we've sort of come to a funny place of comfort about understanding that about our plan and understanding that about our neighbors. And we've created what we call these resilience action teams idea, where we realize that there are certain actions that will only happen if resilience action teams, which i.e. like small groups of committed neighbors, get together and focus on doing these things. And then it'll be up to them to help find the partnering organizations if they need that to make these things happen. So I throw back at you then, sort of, what do you want us to do with actions like that that we know don't require a code amendment or a zone change, or how do we, I mean, what, you understand my question, what do I do with that?
No, I think what I was bringing up was, and I understand that, and I think that's a great approach to some of the other squishier ones. It's just, what I was saying is, if there's ones that we deal with as a planning commission that would in fact need codification or zone changes types of things that you see aren't being addressed in the way that the vision that you're putting forward is there, let us know that, because that's our purview. You know, we don't have the purview over a lot of the squishy areas, the parks districts and the water, you know, River Road, fire and water district, those types of things. But if it's something that we can direct staff to say, hey, no, we think this rises to a level that needs more attention, that we've heard from the CAC and those types of things. That's what I was saying, is if it's in our wheelhouse and you guys think it's not being addressed to the level that it should be, let us know that. That's what I was trying to get to.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Okay, commissioners, any other comments or questions? Yes, Commissioner Borowski.
Sorry.
I'm laughing because Terry had her hand up, that's all.
Yeah.
But you go.
And this is going to be a question that probably Terry and Chelsea will have. So you were asking us for direction on code, you know, things that you wanted us brought to it. Have you received that direction? Or are there areas that you want to dig down with us on the direction that you're looking to get from us? Because you know, it seemed to me we were doing broad scape stuff, but it's time where we're starting to try and narrow it. And so I'm just asking, are you getting from us what you want? And if not, how do we get that to you?
Chelsea, I think maybe that's I'm sorry, Terry will have to wait for you to answer that one.
Yeah, I was wondering if that was what Terry was about to talk about. But yes, so I think group one, we all agree, CAC and staff want those to move forward, and we want to start working on those code related actions with the plan adoption package. And then I think what you were kind of talking about earlier, what are those things that aren't being addressed with the neighborhood plan but are important to the community? Those are really the group three. So the Willamette Greenway, some of those things are those bigger actions that are super important to the community that staff has not recommended be addressed with the neighborhood plan, mostly due to limited resources and just staff capacity at this point. So it would be helpful to get feedback on those group 2 and 3 actions. yeah, I don't know if Terry, if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, just to make a little bit of clarification from where staff is coming from in terms of the grouping of group 1, 2, and 3, we're recommending a phased approach based on where community priorities and capacity come together. But nobody on staff is saying group 3 is a bad idea, or we hate the Greenway, or anything on that list is a bad idea. I just want to say that because I think there is a danger of misunderstanding that CAC wants something and staff wants something else. It's not that from my perspective. It's a process of continuing to work on a plan for implementing all actions that are feasible. And there were some noted throughout the presentation where we have feasibility concerns, and we have to take those as they come along the way. I just also wanted to add one other thing, which is a couple of commissioners brought up, yeah, what about that group 3? What about that citywide issue? And those, so Greenway, neighborhood applicant meeting were 2 examples. And those are things that we should talk about. And in the context of the city's, the planning division's work plan as a whole, in the context of our city budget, which will be coming out at the end of April, and your planning commission retreat. And so there are a couple of opportunities coming up where the commission can take some of the things that have been discussed in this and been brought to light, as one of you said, through the Riverhead plan, but affect other citywide processes or even state issues. So just to say, we have some, I said this already, we have significant work to do, but we do have opportunities in place to discuss how those things best.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say that I think it's clear to me that all of these issues are important to the community. And it's also clear to me that there's just this limited amount of resource we have to address these issues. And I think what I'm most encouraged by is the idea that they're still recognized, they're still here, and they're still out in the front. We're still talking about them. But there are several opportunities for us as a commissioner. As commissioner, you mentioned the retreat, for example, but also just to keep these things to the forefront as we go forward. And so I don't get the sense that we're going to lose them or that somehow they're going away or they're less important. It's just that where we are at this moment, at this snapshot in time, this is the priorities. And I'm very comfortable with going away that you have presented them, because I trust in the people involved in the process that if there's an opportunity to elevate a number 3 to a number 1, you will do that. And so I'm willing and happy to let you do that with the encouragement to go forward and do the best you can with the resources you have. But I think the track you're on is a good one. So I'm really comfortable with that. I'm not really hearing anything different from the CAC unless John's going to jump in here and tell me something. Go ahead, John.
Forgive me from drawing from my past experience as a planning commissioner, but I have been involved in those retreats and planning sessions where you look at the work plan. I don't know if it's the case now, but perhaps what might be useful is to create an on-deck circle or a bin or some way to keep track of those issues that you really think are important to get to, but you don't have the resources now. Totally understand the conundrum, but that they're memorialized so the next time you come around to look at the work plan again, they're there to review and perhaps remove some, add some, but at least consider them as you're working on that future work plan.
Okay, does anybody else want to weigh in on, I think really the task today is, are we okay with group 1, 2, and 3? And I know some of us have expressed an opinion. Anybody else feel like they want to weigh in at this point? Okay, wow, we did it. So with that, not hearing any last second questions for the staff or the CAC members that are assembled here. Okay, so I think that closes our agenda item letter B for today, which is the work session. And once again, my extreme delight in the opportunity to work with all of you, citizens, staff, and fellow commissioners. This kind of work is rare, and I think it's a privilege for me, having been in the planning community forever, to work at this level with this level of quality and commitment. It's really very rare, and you all should be commended. Thank you for your time, and best of luck as you go forward. This is a great project. So with that, then Terry, is there anything, items from commission and staff, anything from other commissioners? I'm on to agenda item C here.
I think commissioners typically go first. Any items from commissioners?
In that case, yes, Commissioner Borowski.
And I don't know if this is you, Terry, or Alyssa or whatever, and it'll probably come up at our work session or retreat. But I was in a meeting the other day, the Technical Advisory Committee for monitoring and the urban reserves planning, and the comprehensive plan came up, you know, because the urban reserves are going to land in the comprehensive plan. Do you have any idea as to how or when we're going to get back to working on the comp plan, in particular the housing section of the comprehensive plan, or is that just going to live in the metro plan for eternity?
No, it won't. We're hopeful that at least housing policies can be brought forth in parallel to the code work being done on middle housing, but there are some reasons not to tie them too tightly together. And one of those reasons is that there's additional state rulemaking happening on housing, for housing production strategies, which was House Bill 2003, and for the equitable climate friendly communities rulemaking, which will cause amendments to Goal 10. And so the current thinking for the housing chapter of the comprehensive plan is that we would like to take the public input that's been gathered for middle housing and make recommended additions or changes. Because as you might remember, that chapter was drafted several years ago. We have a solid draft, but it needs to be updated. And so using all the information that was gathered from the outreach groups for middle housing, we'd like to make some recommendations and allow for the rulemaking to happen before we put forward that housing chapter for adoption. The other chapters are waiting in line in deck for Chelsea to have some free time to work on them. One of the ramifications of the staff changes was Chelsea was pulled off the comprehensive plan and onto Riverhead.
Thank you. And then one other thing that's been brought to my attention, and I don't know if we can fit it in with the housing code amendments that we're looking forward to, but as my tenure as an eWeb commissioner has come forward, there was some talk that has been brought to eWeb about the fact of undergrounding and overhead lines to some of these types of housing projects, you know, whether it's going to be implemented with 2001, where you're going from a single family to a duplex, or if there's a SDU that's going out in the back. Right now, it calls for undergrounding of power cables, which is very onerous and expensive. And when there's, you know, if you're doing this in a neighborhood that's got overheads everywhere, and then all of a sudden you're going to redevelop and you have to spend $15,000 to underground for an accessory dwelling unit, it really adds to the cost of housing. So I'm wondering, do you think that that's something that could fit into the code amendments that we're moving forward? Because I would like to see that brought up. Just a question.
Yeah, great question. The undergrounding requirements occur in Chapter 9 and also Chapter 7 of our code. And so, or I think it's 7. I think there are opportunities, and also we're going to have to be vigilant about recognizing where requirements for infrastructure occur and pop up at different points in the process. So I've heard that same concern brought up in the context of middle housing and clear and objective and housing tools and strategies. And so it's definitely on the radar. And I think for this group to weigh in on code changes to Chapter 9, yes, there will be opportunities to do that. And then we're also having to work with our public works partners to recognize where those requirements pop up in other code chapters.
Thank you. I know when we open up Chapter 9 for it's tough to get it opened up again. So I'd like to, you know, if we can do it in this one, I would appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay. Any items from any other items from commissioners before we hand it off to staff items? Nothing? Nothing? All right. Terry, back to you again.
Okay, I just want to thank Chelsea and Elena for a great presentation, and all of the other Community Advisory Committee members. Thank you so much for coming today and presenting all of the hard work, and Jared faithfully listening in the background on behalf of the county. Thank you very much. I know your next meeting is March 29th, a daytime meeting to talk about a plan amendment and zone change, and also a presentation on the housing tools and strategies, which is transforming into a housing implementation pipeline. So that's exciting. That'll happen next week. And one other update I got was the application period closed for Planning Commission recruitment. There were 15 applications that were submitted. So that's a great number, and a variety of wards and age categories and different perspectives that folks bring to that. So that's exciting. And the council will be going through their usual process of voting on folks to interview later in April. I think that's all of the staff information I have. Anyone have any other things?
No. So with that, I believe we have concluded our day's business, and I will adjourn the meeting and see you next Monday, the 29th. Enjoy your week.
Thank you.
Thank you.